Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to be giving you a walk around of the old F100 here. This thing's been asked quite a bit that I do a video on it, so I figured, why not? So I'm going to take you around on this thing and show you all the little bits that I've done to it to get it to where it's at this point. I'm also going to give you a little history on the thing and let you know kind of how I found it, why I've done what I've done, and all the modifications it's taken to get to this point. So stick around. Now before I get too far into this video, I just wanted to give a quick shout out. You guys are awesome. I just hit 100 subscribers and actually it's kept going. So shout out to you guys, you did awesome. Give a special shout out to Jason. He was my 100th subscriber. We had a little chat about that. So this is his prize for 100. Now if we get to 1,000, I might do something a little bit bigger. Make a sign, give it away, do something cool like that. So keep them coming, keep following along with all my projects. It's really awesome that you guys are interested in it. Leave me a comment, let me know how you found me and what you like best about the channel, whether it's the signs or the trucks or maybe something I haven't done yet that you'd like to see me do. Obviously I got stuff all over the garage, I have tons of interests. So really nothing's out of the question, but let me know down below, and before we get too far, go down, hit that like button, let me know that you're following along. So a quick history on this thing is, back in the day I used to drive a delivery route, and you've probably already seen here, City of Dallas Center on the doors. Now, part of my delivery route was I ran a lot of rural areas, and one of the places in particular that I went was up near Dallas Center here in Iowa. And one place in particular that I always enjoyed driving by was an old farm kind of out in the middle of nowhere, kind of your typical farm USA. Bunch of cars, bunch of trucks just kind of parked out along the fence row, and one day in particular I spied this old truck sitting right towards the end of the fence row and thought about it, kept on driving, and sure enough, about a week later, I said, you know what? What's the harm in stopping just to see if anybody's home? It was an active farm, and so being Iowa, you know, farmers are typically around somewhere throughout the day. So I did. I stopped at the farmer's house. Super nice guy. Talked to him for a little bit. Told him I was interested in the truck, that I'd seen it sitting there for quite a while, and he actually let me know that it was his son's truck, and that he had thought about doing a project on it, but it's been sitting there for years and years and he hadn't really moved on it, so he was going to talk to his son. So I told him I'd be back in the area next week. I'd go ahead and stop by. So next week rolls around, I stop by his house. Sure enough, he's there, happy to see me. Says he talked to his son, and his son was more than happy to sell this thing and move on to another project. Like I said, they had a whole fence row of projects sitting around. So talked to the farmer a little bit to see what his son was kind of wanting out of the project, and got a chance to look at it. The farmer had went ahead in that week that I had been gone and threw a battery in it for me. Tried to get it to start, hadn't had any luck, and he was nice enough though to hook onto it and drag it up onto the driveway for me. So we got to talking money and came to the price of $300 for this thing. He was happy to let it go and get it out of his yard. The son was happy with what he was getting out of it, and I was sure happy with what I was paying for it. The thing overall was pretty solid. It needed the typical work that an Iowa truck like this needs. Floor pans were gone, front cab mounts were gone. You can see here in the back, the box sides has been repaired before, but the upside to this thing, again, is that it was a city truck. So although it got used and abused every single day, the miles were relatively low on it, and it had been maintained fairly well. So, true to my word, I came back later that night, had another battery just in case, had some gas with me, just some basic tools, and did a few minutes of work in his driveway, and actually got the thing to fire right up. Found out that the brakes worked great. The farmer had been nice enough while I was gone. He aired up the tires for me. Kind of did a quick check over on it to make sure everything else seemed to be okay. And the brakes worked and everything else seemed to work as it should. So what's a guy to do at that point? I hopped right in the thing and headed to the nearest gas station. Lucky for me, the fuel system was all working. I don't know how long this thing had been sitting exactly on that fence row, but from what I gathered, it had been in the ballpark of 5 years. So from there, I took it straight to the gas station. I put enough gas in it to get me home just because I knew I'd be tearing that all apart and kind of going through all that stuff anyway, and shot it straight out on the interstate. And I'll tell you what, this thing, for being sat that long and questionable tires and questionable everything else, I went 70 miles an hour straight down the interstate all the way back home and didn't have an ounce of issues with it. Now, it did have some lights that weren't working and stuff like that, but otherwise, straight as an arrow down the interstate and did what it should. So at the time I picked this thing up, I actually didn't have any intentions on bagging it or doing anything crazy with it. Really, I just thought it was a neat old truck. I'd always loved this body style, and the standard cab, short bed, just fit the bill for what I wanted. Now, it was a straight six, 3 on the tree, bare bones truck, obviously a city truck, so they didn't put any frills in this thing. It really was in about the shape that you see it now, other than I had started doing some body work on it years ago. So really all I did was got it home and just started tinkering on it. Really started doing, your basic stuff, maintenance, tune-up, oil change, brakes all the way around, just that kind of stuff. I started cleaning up the interior a little bit, put a little bit of a stereo in it, and put some new tires on it. And really for about a year, this thing was just my daily driver, kind of in stock form, and I had a blast driving it. And then I got the itch to do a little bit more. I obviously had the Ranger, which you guys have seen. I had that for years and years. That was, I think, my 3rd or 4th vehicle I've ever owned in my life, and it's one of the only ones I've kept this long. So the idea was that I already had the Ranger. I had something that was lowered and wheels and kind of all that, and even that thing at that point was a little bit of a work in progress. But I really wanted something more. I wanted something to challenge myself, both mentally and challenge my skills and see how far I'd come. Now, back in the day, you may have seen a little bit of the stuff around the garage, but I used to race and run figure 8 here around Iowa. And so I built plenty of cars from scratch. I built roll cages, I'd done suspension, fabrication work. I'd done all that, but I was getting out of racing and really wanted something to put all those similar skills to use. So it wasn't so much that I wanted to just do a restoration. I really wanted something to challenge myself with. So that's where the idea of doing air ride came in. And at first I wasn't gonna do anything crazy. I was just gonna kind of what I would consider your old man bag job, get it lower. And then as the ideas started rolling and everything kind of started coming together, I realized that it was going to be quite a bit more than that. And really the biggest factor in that was the I-beam suspension on this truck. Now you can definitely bag these trucks with the I-beams. In fact, my 79 is still on the I-beams, and that's a whole nother story that actually ties into this truck. But I wanted something that rode nice, I could drive around an inch off the ground and not have any issue with. I wanted to be able to drive this truck all over the country, and no matter where I went, if I had any kind of issue, I could walk into the local parts store and pretty much have whatever I need right there on the shelf. And when you think of that, probably the easiest and first thing that comes to mind is the Crown Vic suspension. Now keep in mind, this was all before the Crown Vic subframe swap that's super popular today. This thing is actually sitting on a full steel front stub off a Crown Vic Interceptor, so it's a completely different design and completely different setup than what you may be used to seeing now with those subframe swaps. It's a lot more involved, but at the end of the day, it fit exactly what I wanted to do. From there, it was really the big challenge back here. I had never done a 4-link before from scratch. I'd never done, full notches and kind of the whole works and done it all from scratch before. I'd had my hands in, working on some air ride and installing some hydraulics back in the day and doing that kind of stuff, but had never really gone this in depth on a build before. And obviously something like a race car isn't going to get this type of a suspension setup. And so this is where it all started. I hadn't done the front yet. I had started cutting into the rear and started building all this, and really from about the back of the notch forward is pretty much all custom. I did use some sections of the frame, but the entire frame is boxed and trussed all the way up to the Crown Vic front stub where I tied into that. As you can see, this thing is still a work in progress. Basically what happened is I got to this point with this truck, was right in the middle of the build. Everything was going full swing and making a ton of progress on this. And the business that I worked at the time happened to sell to a bigger business. And so when they sold out to the other business, our location was closed down. Basically, we all lost our jobs, and we had a little bit of time to get all of our stuff out of the shop, and that included this truck. So we only had a little bit of time to get everything cleared out of that shop, which included this truck sitting there, all my fab equipment, and a lot of parts and pieces to everything that I own. I was lucky enough that the owner of the shop at the time allowed me to work on my stuff after hours and even to store my truck there. At the time, I didn't have a garage to work in. We had a condo, and obviously you can't do all this out in a parking lot. So I was very fortunate at the time to have that, and unfortunately, I had to load it all up. So then what happened, you may ask? Well, life got in the way, and a new job got in the way. A lot of things contributed to it. I didn't have anywhere to work on this truck anymore was the biggest thing. So it got put under a tarp, it got put on the trailer, and it went out to my dad's to kind of serve the same purpose it was before, sitting on the fence row. And unfortunately, it sat there for even longer than it did the first time at the farmer's house. So all in all, this truck ended up sitting out at my dad's for right around 8 years. We bought our house here about 5 years ago, and at the time I didn't have enough room to bring this truck home. I had other projects in the garage, I had other things going on. We were remodeling part of the house, and so I just didn't have the space for it. So even though now I had a garage to keep it in and to work on it, I still didn't have the space or the time to do so. So fast forward a couple years, and here we are. I got it in the garage. Still don't have time to work on it like I'd like, but I guess the goal to me is I want to get some of the easier, quicker projects done, so they are off the list. The Ranger, obviously, that I've been working on quite a bit lately, is a lot of just cosmetic and finish up stuff. The F150 is a transmission and some interior work away from being as drivable as it's going to be if I do get into any other things. some of the rust repair and stuff like that. That can all be kind of side projects that I do in my spare time. But really, I don't want to dive back into this truck completely until I'm ready to dive into it completely. It's a huge undertaking and a huge project. Obviously, if you've built one of these, you know where I'm coming from. It is strip it down to nothing and build it from the bottom up. As it sits currently, it doesn't have a stitch of wiring harness in it. The driveline is just in it. At the time when I stopped, I was in the middle of fabricating the engine and transmission mounts. I was starting to run some of the brake lines and get tabs and fittings sorted out so I could have everything finished. I was really right in the kind of final stages of the finished fabrication on the chassis before I really started moving into finish work on the chassis, paint, you know, stuff like that. So that's why you'll see a lot of it in here is just bare metal that's rusted from sitting, because I was literally right in the middle of building this thing when progress got brought to a halt. So unfortunately, there is a few things that from my end of it, letting it sit as long as I did, it's a little worse for the wear. Otherwise, all the foundation is there. Like I said, the majority of the metal work and fabrication is done. It's really down to all the kind of final bits, all the little bits and bobs of it. Like I was saying before, the tabs for brake lines and just little stuff like that, sorting out fuel lines and routing some of the electrical stuff like that is really kind of where I'm at. There is obviously body work yet to do on that, but that wasn't high on the priority list. I have another bed for it that's in quite a bit better shape than this one. You can see some from other parts of the video already that I had started doing some of the body work and actually had the front clip in primer before it got put away. Unfortunately, it just got left in primer, so you know, little dings and dents happened while it was sitting, and there's a few spots where I think some stuff got stored on the hood of it, and it did a little bit of damage to it. But otherwise, like I said, kind of all the bones are here for it, and even if it in its unfinished state, it's still fun to just sit in this thing and kind of reminisce. But anyway, I'll give you a quick kind of walk around and you know, point out a few things that I've done to it, and we'll probably just start on the interior as long as I'm in here, and we'll go from there. So this truck is stock floor body dropped. Like I said before, I did put new floor pans in it. Did a little bit of rust repair. These trucks are super common to rust out right here. Had to do a little patchwork on either side there, but otherwise, with doing the frame how I did it and the Crown Vic stub, I got away without hardly any modification to the floor. You can see up here where I shaved the seam out of the firewall. That looks a lot better from the front side. Those are actually just overlays to kind of beef that area all back up. When I put the floor pans in, I just butted them straight up to the firewall and stitch welded along those two, and then, like I said, overlaid just some bits of sheet metal to really bolster that area. The biggest amount of fab work was just doing the transmission tunnel, and really all I was going for there was I wanted it to look pretty much stock. Once I get carpet back on this thing, I didn't want it to look super out of the ordinary, but otherwise it's pretty much stock floor pans. I just had to trim just a hair to kind of give it a little bit of area here. Did also have to raise this bump right in here and right up there. I had to kind of shift that over and raise it all up, and you'll see once we get under the hood kind of why I had to do that. But otherwise, I had started playing around with the pedals. I had to obviously go to something different on the gas pedal, and that was just kind of a attempt at seeing what I could get away with. It is all mounted in there and functional. I'm not sure if I'll keep that mount on the firewall how it is or come up with something different. But otherwise, the brake pedal was in pretty good shape. The clutch pedal, since it's all manual linkage, I did have to completely change that around because I went to a hydraulic master cylinder. So you can kind of see there, I had to change the lever for the master cylinder. It does go through, the rod goes through the column and comes down and goes to there, but I switched it to hydraulic. The brakes have been switched over to a Wilwood master cylinder, still running manual brakes. I never had a problem with them in the truck, so I figured I'd just go back to that. Probably the biggest change here was the firewall, where the column goes through. You can see kind of I was in the process of doing that, but basically wanted to shave that part of it. I brought all the mounting and everything internally, so out on the firewall it's a nice clean look. You can tell it's custom because of the way it is. Other than that, you know, just an aftermarket steering wheel. I don't know if that'll stay or not. There's a lot that's up in the air. That my mind's changed since the last time I was working on this thing, but really nice, clean stock door panels. Those are getting kind of hard to find. You can find them. You can get repop ones, and they're super expensive, but those ones are in actually really good shape. And then probably my favorite part of this truck, the old 3 on the tree. Now, if you've ever driven one of these things, you know what I'm talking about when I say these things are usually a bear to drive. It is a lot of, you know, hope and pray that you find the gear that you want. You can see this thing's super smooth. I've been through and rebuilt this whole column, new bearing, just a lot of stuff done to this thing. That was one of my main goals when I was building this, was that I wanted to keep it as simple as possible and reliable, but I also wanted it to function better than what it would have stock. And this right here is one of the biggest areas that needed an improvement. So when we get under the hood here, I'll show you exactly what I changed that has made this thing a night and day difference in how it works. See if I can do this without breaking a bunch of stuff. Now obviously this front end's so this front end's just kind of hanging out on here, really, and honestly, the only thing holding the core support, front fenders, all that on is zip ties, and it was just so it was good enough to get on a trailer and get out of there. I have all, luckily, and this is why I highly recommend doing it, I have all of the body bolts, all the engine bolts, everything in Ziploc bags, labeled, and they're all just sitting behind the seat in the cab, so I knew exactly where to find them when the time came that I would need them. So, tip of the day, if you're tearing a car apart, you never know what life will throw at you, and you'll need to remember where those bolts are. So otherwise, back here under the hood, like I was saying before, it's still the original 300 straight 6 that came with it, 3 on the tree, but pretty much everything else has been changed over. It's a Crown Vic front stub. I'll bring you in for a little closer look in some of this stuff, but Crown Vic suspension, obviously. I've upgraded some parts here and there, drilled and slotted rotors, stuff like that, better pads. But really, the other thing I was kind of right in the middle of was doing some of the engine work. You can kind of see where I was at just based on a few of the things under the hood here. I was right in the middle of doing the header. I had to modify the back 3 tubes on the header to clear the chassis, and had just got those done, had started wrapping them, and was going to move on to doing the front ones, and obviously that plan fell through. I was also in the middle of fitting up the intake. This thing I was intending on running 3 Weber side drafts on, just to be something a little bit different. Now I know that goes against my whole idea of having this thing very simple and reliable and parts easy to find. I figured I got to throw a little flair at it somewhere, so might as well be that. But yeah, otherwise, like I said, the intake, which is extremely rare and hard to find for the 300 straight 6 to fit triple Weber side drafts. The header I was talking about, the rear 3 that are wrapped, are the ones I had to modify. The other 3 fit pretty nice. I had to build the motor mounts from scratch. I had to do all the steering from scratch. And then obviously relieved in for the bags and some of the steering, just a lot of chassis, a lot of fabrication work to make the air ride work on that front stub. Now, like I was talking about earlier with the 3 on the tree, the biggest improvement is there's a bearing right in here, and you can kind of see the little bolt heads for it. I put a new bearing in there and rebuilt the rest of the column, which makes this thing, the shift tube and everything, work like butter. But then probably the biggest improvement, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but I rebuilt the shift linkage rods out of aluminum rod with Heim joints. Now from the factory, these things come with a long steel rod and a little tiny rubber bushing that sits in there. And what typically happens is that bushing wears and eventually just disappears over the years. And that's what makes the shifting on these things so sloppy. But otherwise, you can see I was right in the middle of installing brake lines on this thing and starting to get them plumbed up, some braided line in there, and getting the tabs and everything welded onto the chassis. But yeah, under the hood, otherwise, that's you can see where I was talking about shaving the firewall. Again, no body work has been done on anything, so it's all just the raw metal work. You can see the clutch master cylinder I was talking about, kind of how I did all that, and then shaving the steering column mount. Originally from the factory, this thing would have had all those bolt holes that you see from the inside would have been out here. So with this thing all buttoned together, all you see is just that little teardrop gap and a nice clean fit and finish there. You can see this side really kind of shows where I was going with that, just that nice clean finish on it, and then having to raise that portion in there, so just to give me that little bit extra clearance back there. Now from the outside of the truck, there's not any huge changes to what you'd see from the factory. Obviously I had shaved the antenna. I had started doing some of the cab seams, just shaving those. You can tell how right in the middle of this I was, because this side still has the drip rail. The other side I've shaved the drip rail. And I had started, luckily, on some of this stuff to put it in primer. So I had shaved the seam of the cab and just kind of started getting it smoothed out, put it in a coat of primer just to keep it. I'll move into the back. I shaved the cargo light that was up here. And really most of the modifications I've made to this truck have pretty much strictly been on the cab. I love the old door handles, how these things are recessed in, just the looks of it, so I never planned on touching that. I always intended on keeping the badges. Shaved the speaker pocket out of the dash here. That's starting to get a little surface rust, but... And then shaved the Ford lettering off the front of the grill, or the front of the truck. Again, you can see some of that body work isn't holding up too well. I never claimed to be a professional body man, but you know, it'll all get redone. But I did weld the holes for the lettering, so that's not that big of a deal. All original grill shell, not in the best shape, but you know, that'll get taken care of. Moving on back, again, nothing too major done here. This side I was a little further on, shaving some of the seams, and like I said, I had the drip rail almost done, still not 100% done. I had a little bit of welding left to do here. I think I was actually right in the middle of doing this when I had to get everything moved, which is why this is still all just raw and unprimered. But I did, on the back side of that drip rail, there's this little body line in here, and I don't know why they put it in there, but I wasn't going to argue with it. I kind of liked it. It gave it a little neat bit of detail that was just something different than just having it straight shaved off. So again, kind of right in the middle of roughing everything in and getting everything shaved there. But otherwise, that'll pretty much about do it for the body modifications. So back in the bed, nothing too super fancy here. Really about the fanciest thing I went with was the QA1 shocks. They're rebuildable, they're adjustable. That's a little bit of the race car builder in me coming out, is that I wanted to be able to go through and kind of tune the suspension after I was done. So they are rebuildable and revalvable. But otherwise, again, nothing too super elaborate here. That was just a kind of less expensive 4-link kit. Well, actually one of the first parts I bought after I got wheels and everything. And really just threw away the rest of the kit and just used the bars and the link ends for it. And again, just kind of built everything from scratch. It's bag on bar, notched, fish plate, gusseted everywhere. At the time, I kind of thought that was a neat different way to do it. The frame is pocketed for the bags to give them plenty of clearance. And then obviously the brackets are angled, a lot of geometry, figuring all that out and making that all work. But just a different way to reinforce it and kind of strengthen everything up and give it a little bit of some neat detail. But otherwise, pretty much just your normal 4-link setup, nothing too fancy back here. So the wheels were one of the biggest purchases on this thing. Really everything else was just fab work and, you know, a few dollars here and there. But the wheels are Boss. I forget the model number at this point, but I'm pretty sure they're discontinued anyway. So the wheels are 22 by 9.5 if I remember correctly, and they're on 265 35 22 Falcons. Again, it's brand new wheels, brand new tires, and they've never driven more than a few hundred yards. If you guys have been around and remember this truck from back in the forum days, I know there will be a few of you on here. You'll probably remember the video of this thing rolling down the driveway. So if you guys have been around that long, hats off to you. But otherwise, yeah, they need a good cleaning. Well guys, I think that'll about wrap it up on this whole thing. If there's anything more you want to see of it, any more detail on anything, let me know down in the comments. I'm always happy to make a quick video showing, you know, more detail on that front end. I know I get questions on that all the time, you know, how I made it work, how everything fits together, stuff like that. You know, any of the other things that I've done to it, definitely, like I said, leave me a comment. Let me know what you're interested in and what you want to see. And also if there's anything more you want to see, you know, any more of this truck, any more of the other trucks, anything like that, give me a shout down in the comments. Let me know what it is. I'm always happy to oblige. So if you made it this far, I definitely appreciate you hanging out with me, listening to me ramble on about you know, stuff I did 10 plus years ago to this thing. It's been fun kind of having a walk down memory lane in this thing. It's motivated me to do a little bit to it here and there. You know, I obviously for the video I had to kind of cleaned some of the junk out of it, just, you know, cleaned it up a little bit. I just rolled it off the trailer straight into here and took the tarp off of it, and that was kind of all I've done. So yeah, like I said, if you made it this far, I definitely appreciate you hanging out with me. Do me a favor, go down, hit that like button, let me know that you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment again, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, if you hated the whole thing. I want to hear it all, you know, so, but yeah, that should do it. I'm probably gonna kick back in the chair and enjoy a cold drink and maybe just stare at this thing for a little while and think about what all I wanted to do to it that I haven't done yet. So, anyway, we'll catch you next time. Thanks.